Hello and welcome back to JLXP for the World Finals preview. We are 2.5 days away from the finals, and I wanted to get a podcast out to go over the history of these two teams, the more recent history of these two teams, and an in-depth preview of what I think is going to happen in 2.5 days. Originally this week, I was hoping to have the KT history episode with Emily, which I posted 2 days ago, as well as an episode with Chronicler, but we just could not make the Chinese to Los Angeles internet connection work. We tried on multiple different occasions, couldn't get it done, so apologies that we were unable to make that happen, but I'm still going to bring you a nice podcast today. Really quickly, what I'm going to be going over, I'm going to go over the history, the Telecom War. I'm going to talk about KT's curse. I'm going to talk about T1's blessings and how it almost feels scripted. I'm going to talk about more recently how these teams have been looking. I'm going to do some VOD breakdowns of the last series they played. I'll go through the series of possible outcomes that could happen in the World Finals. And then I'm going to do some legacy check-ins on the old T1 Dynasty to the new T1 Dynasty, and also what this would mean for BDD's legacy if he's going to win, before just giving some fairly useless stats at the very end, which I feel like are fun, and I've been posting on Twitter a little bit. So that's what's in store today. If you've been enjoying this podcast throughout the World Championship, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Give me a comment. We've been picking up momentum as we get closer to the finals, which has just been great to see. And also turn on notifications, because I'm going to be doing one episode after the final, probably going to be slightly later than the other reaction podcasts that I've been doing. And then, who knows? Maybe some off-season content, which is going to be less scheduled. But to the series at hand. Here's a little bit of history about the Telecom War. I was never a big StarCraft guy, so I'm only going to give you the highest level cliff notes. But the T1 KT rivalry has been spanning decades. From what I could gather, T1 joined StarCraft back in 2004. KT was in StarCraft since 2001, and they officially changed their name to KT Rolster in 2009. There was a big back and forth rivalry in StarCraft. Boxer was playing for T1. He dominated until Flash joined KT and started dominating. I'm not going to go more into detail on the StarCraft history because I never followed it closely, but if you want to find that content, it exists on YouTube and it's quite interesting. I'm going to focus on the League of Legends rivalry because there was already clashing fandoms when League of Legends started in Korea. But let me tell you, this has not been a war. This has been T1 just consistently tormenting KT throughout their entire League of Legends history. Here's the moments when T1 has beaten KT. The first one, for those people who were longtime League fans, 2013 finals. This is when the look at the cleanse, look at the moves, Faker, what was that call from Doha happened. In Game 5 of the OGN finals in Summer Split, when Faker solo killed Ryu's Zed. The game was honestly already over. It was like a 15,000 goal lead and Faker had an item advantage. But that highlight is probably the most famous highlight in League of Legends history. Maybe not for the current fan, but definitely for the first 5 years of League of Legends. That thing has stood out. It's got like 6 million views on YouTube, the clip I found, and I'm sure it's more viewed on other platforms as well. But this was also one of the first reverse sweeps in League of Legends. So KT was up 2-0 in the finals on the beach. T1 reverse sweeps them. KT ends up not making Worlds. Faker goes on to win his first World Championship, okay? The next time that they meet, 26 in a big way. They obviously played against each other a lot in the regular season, but here are the big moments. KT actually beat T1 in the 2016 summer playoffs, but that wasn't in the final. They then lost to the Ku Tigers in the final, so T1 qualified on points that year, went on to win their third World Championship in 2016. The 2017 Spring Finals and the 2017 Summer Semifinals, T1 beat KT both those times. Then there weren't many meaningful T1 victories over KT because KT was bad for several years outside of 2018 when they made Worlds. The more recent history, which is still pretty insane, is KT made a big comeback in 2023. They went 17-1 in the Summer Split regular season. They chose to play T1 in the upper bracket of their playoffs. They lost to them in 5 games. They then make it all the way back to play them again from the lower bracket, lose again in 5 games. 2024 summer playoffs, they lose to them again. 2024 regional qualifier, they lose to them again, also in 5 games. And then this year, they lose to them in the road to MSI as well. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 meaningful losses from T1 handing it to KT. So I just also did a quick list on Leaguepedia. When you can look at the tournament history of teams, it'll show you the tournament they played in and then like their last match. So this is a quick check of like how often did this organization knock this other organization out of a tournament. And this is going to be in descending order from most recent to oldest. T1 ended KT's tournaments in 2025 Road to MSI, 2024 Regional Finals, 2024 Summer Playoffs, 2023 Summer Playoffs, 2017 Summer Playoffs, 2017 Spring Playoffs, 2016 Spring Playoffs, 2015 Summer Playoffs, 2013 Regional Finals, and the 2013 Summer Finals. Holy crap. The other way around, KT beating T1, it's only happened twice. 2018 Spring Playoffs, not in the final, KT beat T1, and the 2016 Summer Playoffs in the third place match, KT beat T1 3-2, and then, as we know, didn't go on to Worlds. So it's just been completely dominant for T1. KT definitely feels a little bit cursed, which brings me to point 2. Is KT cursed in League of Legends, and why people tell you not to get excited about KT? If you're really interested in this topic, I implore you to check out the podcast I did with Emily. We talk about their history for an hour, but here's the quick list of how close KT was and how good they were and how little they have to show for it. So starting with this 2013 team, they lost in the reverse sweep to SKT T1 and the Faker Zed, and then they lost again to SKT in the regional finals. That roster was Someday, Kakao, Ryu, Score as their AD carry, who then later was their jungler and is now their head coach, and Moffat as the support. So, first narrow miss. Potentially a top 2 team in the world, didn't go to Worlds. 2014, when there were KT Arrows and KT Bullets. The KT Arrows, which was Someday, Kakao, Rookie, Arrow, and Hachani, actually beat the Samsung Blue team in the summer finals. That was the year where Samsung White and Blue ran everyone over in Worlds, only beat each other in the semifinals, and then White ended up winning the entire thing. KT Arrows beat them in the playoffs. But at the time, the qualification for Korean Worlds didn't auto-qualify the summer champion. So they didn't have enough points, championship points, to auto-qualify and had to play in the regional qualifier, where they lose to Najin White Shield and don't go to Worlds again. So, right up there with the top 2 teams in the world, even beat them in the final, didn't get to go to Worlds. 2015, they finally do get to go to Worlds. That's the one time. They lost to T1 in the finals 3-0. They beat G-Nair to go to Worlds, but then in the quarterfinals, they draw the other Korean team, get knocked out. Top 5 to 8 finish. Nothing impressive. In 2016, after they beat SKT in the playoffs, the team that ended up winning Worlds that year, they lost in Game 5 to the Rocks Tigers when a Gangplank ultimate stole Baron from them from about 2 health. Then they get knocked into the regional qualifier because by 2016, LCK changed their format. The summer champion does go to Worlds. So Rocks goes to Worlds off of that Baron steal. KT flies to the regional qualifier where this little upstart team, Samsung, with Core JJ just role swapping to support and rookie AD carry Ruler, upset them. Huge upset in 5 games to take that world slot away from KT in 2016. 2017, they have a close call again. They lose in 5 games to SKT in the semifinals and then lose to Samsung again, this time 3-0 in the regional qualifier. This roster, Smeb, Score, Pawn, Deft, and Mata, is pretty much full of legends, but they could not get it done. 2018, they actually finally get it done a little bit domestically. Smeb, Score, Yukao was a really young mid laner at the time, Deft, and Mata. It was the KT super team. It was the greatest KT team to this moment. They were probably the favorites heading into the World Championship. They lose to IG in 5 games in the quarterfinals before IG wins their next 6 en route to China's first world title. So again, probably the second best team in the world, arguably the best team in the world who didn't quite show up in a best of 5, ends up with a top 5 to 8 finish. So for that 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018 6-year span, they were always right up there with the best teams in the world. And the best they ever did was quarterfinals at Worlds and often missed Worlds outright. Then KT goes through some dark ages, man. 2019, their summer finish was 8th. 2020, their summer finish was 6th. 2021, their summer finish was 7th. 2022, their summer finish was 5th. Until 2023, when they start coming back onto the map. But still, the T1 dominance keeps them down. They go 17-1 in the summer split. Then in the playoffs, because this is the year when Faker hadn't been playing in summer and T1 was looking shaky, they choose to play T1 in the upper bracket of those playoffs. Guess what happens? They lose in 5 games. They match up again with them in the playoffs because now at this point, LCK is playing double limb. They lose to T1 yet again. They did manage to qualify for Worlds this year. They have one of the hardest Swiss draws ever, and then they lose again in the quarterfinals. This roster was Keen, Cuz, BDD, Aiming, and Lehens. Still insanely stacked players when you look at that roster, but could never finish above quarterfinals. Last year, they weren't as good. They had Perfect, Piosic, BDD, Deft, and Barrel, but they were still pretty damn close to Worlds. They lost to T1 3-2 in the final qualifying match to get that 4th seed for the LCK. And, by the way, that 4th seed went on to win Worlds yet again. So there were so many times where the team that qualified over them to go to Worlds would end up either winning Worlds or making it to World Finals. And then this year, of all years, where they're underdogs pretty much the entire year, pretty much 5th place team the whole time, 4th place team maybe, they managed to beat Gen G in a best of 5 after being picked by them. It gets them a top 3 world seed. They get a relatively easy draw up until beating Gen G, and now find themselves in the final, but once again, against T1, the organization that has kicked them down more than any other organization in League of Legends history. I just think that history dump is ridiculous. It's setting up this full circle moment. 2013, Faker beating Score. Now Faker still playing in the mid lane. 13 Worlds later, 12 years later. And Score now the head coach of KT. Also the BDD storyline that's going to be in there. I'm going to get into that as we get down, but I'm just very excited about this. Now a quick rundown of the T1 history. We just talked about how cursed KT has been. How blessed has T1 been, actually? 5 world titles, 8 world finals appearances in the last 13 years of Worlds. 2013, they win. 2014, they narrowly don't make it. 2015, they win in the most dominant Worlds ever. 15 wins, 1 loss. 2016, they win. It was a harder road, 14 wins, 6 losses. 2017, Faker drags them to finals, but they finally fall. This puts them into what I'd consider the T1 dark ages. They miss Worlds in 2018. 2019, they lose to G2 in semis. 2020, they miss Worlds again. 2021, they run this 10-man roster. Faker's getting benched all the time. Guma and Teddy are switching places in AD carry. It seems like a mess until right at the very end, they fire their coaches. They decide on what is essentially the current core with Oner in jungle, Guma and Keria in AD carry and support, and they make this run to semifinals and lose. That kicks off the new Dynasty. They win LCK Spring in 2022. They lose in finals in one of the great upsets to DRX, but then the last 2 years, they make these great runs at Worlds, winning finals in 2023 with an overall record of 13-5, and even after losing to Gen G all year, they beat them in World semifinals in 2024 and end up winning Worlds with an overall record of 13-4. And this year, they are in World Finals yet again with a current record of 11-4, and if you count the play-in, 14-5 against IG. So all told, that is 5 world titles, 8 World Finals appearances, an absolutely insane run that I would break up into 3 eras. The original era, 2013 to 2017, even though there was like the second dynasty of 2015 to 2017, just for the cleanliness, I'm going to do this. From that stretch, they made 4 of 5 World Finals. 2018 to 2021, 0. And 2022 to 2025, 4 out of 4. That's just insane, though. 8 of 13. Most teams are happy to make World Finals for one time in their entire org's history, like KT. T1's done it 8 times. But also, I just spent 15 minutes on the history of T1 and the history of KT. But outside of Score being the original AD carry for KT back in 2013, and being their jungler for some of their runs where they lost close to T1. Or Faker and Coma for being around for almost all of T1's dominance. The connected tissue outside of the names of the orgs and the fandoms isn't really there. So none of it really, really matters. The players don't care that much about the history of the orgs. It feels like there's this ethereal connection to it, but it's going to be these 5 players versus those 5 players and the coaching staffs against each other. So let's look at specifically what these teams has done, which is point 4. What have you done for me lately? T1 versus KT this year. LCK had a weird format. Rounds 3 to 5 was essentially their summer split, where the top 5 teams played a triple round robin against each other. KT lost the first 2 best of 3s. They got swept, but they did win the last one. They 2-0'd T1 most recently in their final best of 3 of the regular season. KT lost to T1 in the road to MSI, 3-1. T1 double swept KT in split 2, and they also beat them 2-1 in the LCK Cup. So my count this year, T1 has a 6-1 series score against KT and a 13-4 game score. Across the year, KT hasn't been that impressive. Taking out the preseason games where they were playing with 5 completely different players, Games of Legends has their overall win-loss at 64 wins and 61 losses, only a 51% win rate across the entire year. Keep in mind, being in Group Good, the Legends group, makes their strength of opponent some of the hardest in the world, but still 51% for world finalist isn't incredibly confidence-inspiring. T1, 103 wins, 61 losses, 63% win rate. The path that these teams took to Worlds. KT started off playing MCOY and Team Secret Whales. They fell behind in both of those early games, but they were steady and they won with scaling. They then 2-0 TES to qualify to quarterfinals pretty easily with an undefeated record. They then get one of the easier draws, playing CFO and 3-0ing them. Then they get the hardest draw, Gen.G, the team that basically hadn't lost all year, but is somewhat cursed at Worlds in a similar way that KT's cursed in general. They beat Gen.G 3-1 to now make it into finals with a 10-1 record. Let's look at T1. Their path this Worlds. They started in the play-in. They beat IG, who had former world champions Shy and Rookie, 3-1. They then honestly get a piss-easy Swiss draw. They beat Fly, they lose to CFO, who KT 3-0'd. They lose to Gen.G in shocking fashion. It was almost a perfect game by Gen.G. And then they only have to beat NA and EU teams to make it out, and not even G2. They 2-0 100 Thieves, and they 2-0 Koi. Then they have probably their hardest series of Worlds. They beat AL 3-2, the one LPL team that had been challenging the LCK all year, nearly beat them in a number of occasions, only losing in Game 5 at MSI to both T1 and Gen.G, and then again in Game 5 here. So heartbreak for AL, but T1 squeaks past them. And then most recently, T1 has their most confidence-inspiring series of the entire Worlds, and they sweep TES to go in to finals against KT, feeling like the overwhelming favorites based off of recent history. But if you look at the whole year, and if you look at the most recent Swiss stage, T1 was a little bit shaky. But recent form matters a lot. So their most recent series versus TES, I have a couple of clips that I want to go over. T1 played incredibly well. Let me set up game 1 real quick. T1 has scaling. They have Orianna. TES decided to try and punish it with Akali. The way this matchup breaks is before Orianna can complete her durability items, Akali needs to punish her in the side lanes. And T1 just never let that happen in this game in a couple of instances. First off, I just want to point out that at 12 minutes, even though TES has swapped their dual lane mid, Faker stayed mid. He doesn't want to move into the side lanes yet because that's when he's going to get attacked. So T1 delayed Faker's movement to the side lane a little bit, which I think was smart. When Faker finally does get into the side lane, TES immediately attacks, and I'll say that Keria did an insane job covering for Faker. So this is how most Akali Orianna matchups will play out. As soon as this wave starts pushing in, the Orianna is not just going to give up the farm. They want to push the wave in, and that's when Akali is going to want to try and attack, and that's why TES has more people up on this side of the map. But if we look at the way the play actually plays out, Faker just does a really good job staying calm, alting Cream backwards, getting his phase rush, and then look at Carry on the side. Exhausting Kanavi, just never letting them make the approach. Really well done. They try and attack him again at 16 minutes, but again, they used essentially as few resources as they needed to keep Faker safe, but they were just completely on the same page. So Cream and Kanavi want to go for Faker once again. He all-ins him. He gets him low. Maybe they're thinking about going for a dive. Faker's done a really good job managing it. And look at Carry on the minimap. He actually comes up from the bottom side of the map just to get in range to drop this redemption for Faker, which then makes it so the dive won't have a chance of killing. TES has to back away. When this game hit 20 minutes, T1 had basically already won, but I think the highlights of this game was just how locked in T1 was for their win conditions and keeping Faker good. In Game 2, I thought T1 had a big favor draft, but I thought Keria just had some of the best engages I've ever seen. This one's pretty simple. Otacon, watch Keria up at the top of the map here. He's actually disguised as Jarvan right now, but right here, after the pillar, the logical thing would be that he just sends the clone in for vision because the bot lane is pushed and this wouldn't be a great time to start the fight. No, that's the real Keria. So he fools TES, lands a great engage, they're able to one-shot Jackie Love, win this fight, and essentially get the Otacon. Then there was another insane moment, which I can't really show well without the spectator tool, but Kadril did a really great job during his stream. Basically, you can see on the minimap right here that that's actually Keria in the jungle. What he ends up doing, he turns himself into a wolf and then has the knowledge that unless TES is actually hovering over the area in between turrets on the minimap, the wolf isn't going to show as a dot. So Faker's keeping vision for the team. They've called this play 10-15 seconds in advance. There's the wolf once again. You can see him on the bottom of the screen. Keria lands another insane engage, which is just how he's such a difference maker on picks like Nico and Bard, which I think are going to be incredibly important, but it was on full display in this game. There were multiple times where him and Guma also set up dives where T1 executed, but so much of this game was off the back of Keria winning lane and then finding insane teamfight initiations. In Game 3, I thought this was a really cool example of how T1 has adapted to drafts. Earlier on in the tournament, they lost to Sion, they were getting slammed by Kiana, and I didn't know if they had good answers for them. But what they've ended up doing is they've picked Pantheon Sion the last two times directly into the Kiana, and then they've had laser focus of killing the Kiana. So in this game, I still feel like it's pretty dicey. This is the closest game of the series between TES and T1. And Kanavi has 4 early kills. But watch this clip. Watch Oner's Pantheon and Doran Sion, and how as soon as Kanavi appears on the map, they one-shot him. Oner stuns him, Doran flash ults him, and they clean him up. But then watch the rest of this fight. It actually is pretty close. Faker almost falls. Keria eventually does fall. Faker barely gets his ult off. T1 ends up winning this, but imagine this fight. If they don't have that laser-focused game plan of how they're going to be one-shotting the Kiana with those two champions every time he comes in and Kiana actually gets an ultimate off, it's toast. Maybe that series extends, but that is T1 and how their series went. Now I want to move to the KT series, which, upon the rewatch, was quite interesting. Game 1, I think they should have lost this game. On my last episode with Genji, I went over when Genji could have just secured or basically denied KT the Mountain Soul, but Canyon ulted mid lane, gets trapped by Caitlyn, and ends up giving over the Mountain Soul. But even from that point, Genji still had winning positions. And here's a fight that was just incredibly clutch by BDD. He flashes, gets the stopwatch from Chovy, which Doc Dam immediately Caitlyn traps, and they manage to get the shutdown on the Chovy. This essentially just bought them enough time with the Mountain Soul to get the overall game power to a point where they could outscale. But if BDD doesn't make that play right there, while Genji's pushing with Baron, they probably win Game 1. And since they actually did lose Game 2, Genji would have been up 2-0 and probably wouldn't have tilted. I will say in Game 3, this is where Chovy choked, so to speak. But if you look at this point in Game 3, 12 minutes, 20 seconds in, Chovy's doing Chovy things. He's 15 CS up in the Orianna versus Azir matchup. But let's watch what happens. BDD and Cuz find a good gank timing. I will say, you can flash this if you get the timing perfect. But the angle that BDD found would not allow a flash to the side. So Chovy tries to flash over it. I think he flashed a bit early, so he still gets pushed back. They immediately stun him into the wall. I don't hate Chovy for this one, but then I'll say BDD never relented the pressure and didn't give Chovy any type of god respect. He was playing essentially with nameplates off, because when Chovy comes back into lane, it was so shocking the observers actually missed the solo kill at first, so they gave a replay. But BDD gets yet another kill onto Chovy, which I'm going to show you in the replay real quick when they get to it. Was just Chovy disrespecting BDD and BDD completely stepping up. For what it's worth, I do feel like in this play, Chovy was kind of baiting because Pantheon was going to be ulting in. But it's a pretty simple solo kill. I do just feel like there's a lot of players that wouldn't have solo killed Chovy in this moment because they would have just thought he knew what he was doing rather than understanding the actual moment in the game. Game 4 originally I thought was a bit more of a BDD masterclass. Upon rewatch, I do feel like Gen G was just playing situations in really bad ways where they should have been split pushing with York. Instead, they forced team fights, and KT had a better early team fighting comp and just managed to carry the game. So I have weird feelings about KT's last series against Gen G, since I would say that Game 1, they won, but it was kind of off of some Gen G mistakes. Game 2, they lost. Game 3, they made good early plays, and then at that point, Gen G broke. Gen G's anxiety got too high, and they started choking. So take that for what you will. T1's last series looked incredibly dominating, arguably against a TES who was choking, but I just saw good plays there by T1. Whereas in the KT game, my eyes were drawn towards Gen G mistakes. Gen G was the better team all year, so I have higher standards for them than I do for TES, but I do feel like it's interesting that T1 played better against a worse opponent, and KT played worse against a better opponent who then tilted. It makes me very confused for what's going to happen in the actual series. I have some quick draft analysis that I'll try and get through as well. I haven't noticed a huge difference in the way these two teams draft. I do feel like KT have a higher Rumble prio. They're willing to blind it into Ambessa, which a lot of people think is a hard matchup, and I think statistically it has been. They've been picking Caitlyn early on in Worlds and continue to pick it today. I'd say a big difference is KT doesn't like banning mid lane champs. They haven't banned Azir. T1 is banning Azir a lot when there's an Ori Azir trade or they're opting into the Ori Azir double ban and like trying to make it happen. KT's not doing that. T1, on the other hand, has been drawing a lot of Bard bans, which makes sense with Keria, and I think should potentially be drawing a lot of Nico bans as well, because Keria has been one of the best players in the tournament. I'd also say the early tournament issues that T1 had with Sion, with Rek'Sai, with and against Kiana. There's the whole Mundo incident, which I need to take a tangent on at some point, but I don't want to break the flow right now. I feel like T1's fixed a lot of the issues they had early on, but I'm still not completely sold on, one, their ability to play with and against Kiana, even though the Sion Pantheon has been working pretty well. Definitely not sold on their Mundo, but I think they get a lot of flexibility based off of Keria's skill on Bard and Nico. So I wouldn't be surprised in Game 1 of this series if we actually just see the Azir-Orianna trade, since KT is blue side, and if T1 wants to avoid the trade, they're going to be sacrificing 2 bans and potentially 3 bans with Orianna, Azir, Yunara. Since Yunara has been banned in all but one quarterfinal game of the bracket stage, that's 22 of the last 23 games. And interestingly enough, T1's blue side banned it a few times, whereas KT hasn't blue side banned it. So T1's bans could be locked unless they're willing to do the Ori Azir trade in Game 1, which makes me think they're just going to do the Ori Azir trade in Game 1 so they have more flexibility for the series. One fun stat I found is Docdam actually leads Worlds in damage per minute. He's at 958, which is insane. The number 2 player is Gumayushi at 862 DPM. They're number 1 and 2, but Docdam being at 958 is pretty damn impressive. I've never seen a DPM that high at a World Championship, and if he has a great series, there's a possibility he could end over 1,000, which I believe would make him the first player to ever do that, which is pretty cool. So, that's kind of it. I'm going to go into the possible outcomes, but I do need to spend a quick tangent on this Oner Mundo thing, because it's been driving me crazy. And I need to be careful, because they did win, and it worked, so it feels defensible. But for those of you who don't know, T1 released the voice comms of their Game 5 against AL in the quarterfinals, where essentially Oner didn't even know Mundo's skills. They were in a point of the draft where they were really afraid of AL playing Mundo. They'd already picked Jinx, and then T1 was picking their first two. They ended up going Renekton Mundo. And the defenders of this are like, oh yeah, they had to pick away the Mundo. It was their only choice. Wow, the guts to do it in this situation. He never played the pick, like seriously, and he played really bad in the game. So just imagine if they had lost that incredibly close game 5 and somehow those comms had gotten out. You would be getting trucks to their coaching staff. How could you not prepare Oner to play Mundo? How could you never practice this? How could you let him first time a champion? It would be an insane fumble. And I think it literally was, but they overcame it because Faker, Guma, and Keria played that game so well. And specifically, like in that draft, I was going through it in my head. What would have been better? So one, practice Mundo. But let's assume you haven't done that and you get stuck in this situation. It's similar, in a sense, to 2016 semifinals when Coma forgot to ban Peanuts in Italy, who Peanut was going to carry the game if you gave him Nidalee. So Bengi plays it, even though he hadn't been a great Nidalee. But Bengi had played Nidalee. He knew the skills. It was a strong champion. He played good in that game. That's what makes that heroic. Oner didn't play good. There's no way he could have. But if you're really going to tell me that like you have to play Mundo in that slot, I completely disagree. They first picked Jinx. They're saying they're going scaling. They want to do 5v5 team fight. I understand that you don't want to give them Mundo if you're not going to match scaling team fighting. But we're so deep in Fearless. There's so many champions gone. I think if you opt in as Red Side right away to their Jinx, you can just build a better 5v5 team fight composition. You can take Sejuani Lulu 1-2. They don't get the enchanter they want for Jinx. You get the better tank engaged jungler. Sure, they can take Mundo there, but you're going to be able to shred them later. You can pick a Felios on 3, a Control Mage on 5, and whatever top laner you want on 4 as a blind pick after the bans have come through. So I think you can just build a better teamfight composition as the red side. But with that being said, they won. So it doesn't really matter, but I wanted to spend a couple minutes ranting on that because it was ridiculous to me. Okay, for the timestamp enjoyers, what will happen? I know there's a lot of times where you just predict the series, but you're honestly kind of guessing a little bit anyway. So I assigned a percentage chance for all possible outcomes of this series. T1 3-0 3-1 3-2 or KT 3-0 3-1 3-2. What percentage chance do I think this has of happening, and how would it happen? Originally, I was thinking this was a 70-30 series for T1. When I looked at some of the things that T1 has been improving upon, as well as their overall strength of schedule and some of the draft stuff I just talked about, I lowered it a little bit. I did a Twitter poll, which also went overall 70-30 for T1. I'm generally, right now, at 60-40. I think there's a 30% chance that T1 3-0s, a 20% chance they 3-1, a 10% chance they 3-2. I think for KT, there's a 5% chance they win in 3-2, a 20% chance they win in 3-1, and a 15% chance they win in 3-0. And here's the broad strokes of how I would imagine the series going if this happens. T1 3-0, let's start with that. Part of this is going to come down to experience, for sure. I think World Finals is unlike any other experience that players can have. And the fact that T1 has been here 4 consecutive years is going to make them so much more calm at the start of the game than KT. I think when you look at the lane-by-lane matchups this Worlds, I think Dorn's played a little bit better than Perfect. I think Cuz and Oner have been pretty even. I think BDD has probably been the best player in the tournament, so I'd slightly favor him over Faker. Guma, I'd slightly favor over Docdam, even though Docdam's DPM has been so high. He's fallen way behind in a couple early games. And I think Carry is the best support in the world. So that's more lanes favored for T1 for sure. Plus they have the experience advantage. Plus they've beaten KT the majority of times this Worlds. So I could definitely see, even with the BDD advantage and Cousin Oner being even, if BDD feels the pressure, pushes a little bit too much, the KT side lanes falter, it's just going to be progressive tilt throughout the series, and we could just end up with a very stock, standard, simple T1 sweep. 3rd title in a row, greatest team of all time, greatest legacy of all time. T1 gets it. The 3-1, is if KT settles in a little bit. BDD will actually get the best of Faker. BDD's been the best player at Worlds, but I still feel like Keria is going to smurf in most of these cases. He's going to find great engages. The draft pressure that he applies with Renata, Bard, Nico, the dynamic nature of the way he plays is going to be too much. And this also means Doran plays normal. Doran doesn't choke. Doran doesn't tilt under the pressure. He gets the better of perfect. A T1 3-2. I think if it does get to a final fifth game, T1 is largely favored just because of the pressure advantage. But if it gets to this fifth game, I think it's through BDD's advantages. I feel like Peter's going to step up in the series. Maybe they do something creative in draft, like give away Bard in game one, take Nico into it, try and win that game, get two of the best cards away from Keria, and hope that the series progresses to a point where Keria is playing standard stuff, like Nautilus or Leona or Alistair, where he's not going to be as insane as when he's playing the more creative stuff. But like, if it goes to a game 5, it's hard for me to imagine that the T1 Magic won't prevail, so I'd give them a high chance of winning that. If KT wins game 5, it's going to be some karmic event with the KT curse being broken. It would be the most hype, most exciting, upset-laden thing we've ever seen. Pretty much all the same things as above, where I feel like BDD would be carrying. Maybe BDD plays like a game 5 Zoe. I think there's no way they give them Zoe Ziggs in game 5, but can you imagine? When he won game 5 against JNG, he played Lissandra. Like, BDD would play something crazy in game 5. Him and Cuz would have the Shaq and Kobe level performance where they just hard carry the team. That would be the path to KT 3-2. The more one-sided series for KT, though, I could envision BDD 20% chance KT 3-1. I could imagine BDD just absolutely smurfing on Faker, right? All the laning weaknesses that we were talking about from Faker before the Worlds tournament, maybe they would come true in this series because BDD is playing on that other level. Also, Dokdam's been an absolute beast in late game situations. Maybe he just bests Guma the entire series. They do some great draft stuff against Keria, and maybe Doran locks up later in the series. Maybe he's just a passenger. He's not making big plays. He's potentially getting solo killed by Perfect the same way that he was getting solo killed by Doggo's Draven earlier in Swiss stage. Those moments weren't that long ago. I have a 15% chance for a KT 3-0, which is going to sound high, unless it happens, in which case come back to this video. This would be 2017 all over again. I've seen a lot of parallels drawn by people, analysts, between the 2017 SKT and this version, where Faker's playing extremely well. He's kind of dragged them over the line, which, like, this was all true before the TES series. They barely snuck through Swiss stage. They barely beat AL. Faker had to do some incredible things, much like in 2017, where he had to play this insane Galio series against RNG just to make it out of semifinals. And he had to play amazing in that 5-game series against Misfits just to make it to the finals. Really similar. This run was really similar to that until they blasted TES in the semifinals. So if that T1 is really just held together with duct tape this year and we just haven't noticed, in the finals, BDD is just going to smurf on Faker if this is 3-0 happens. But also, their drafting is just going to be superior. T1 was struggling with draft earlier. It feels like they found a way to fix it, but I still don't trust. Mundo, is Mel a good champion? Faker's made it look good, but if BDD and KT is more familiar with the pick now that they've seen it and they've refreshed their minds on what type of burst thresholds that Mel has, they're not going to overcommit on fights the way that AL or TES did. Like I said, they could still potentially neutralize Keria if they just somehow sneak through game 1 with Bard and Nico being left up, get rid of those two champions, play a more standard support meta throughout the series. Also, Renata, one of Keria's other great picks. Peters played that as well and won with it in game 4 of the Gen G series. Maybe they take that away. And then also, for this 3-0 to happen, I think Doran has to tilt. So I think the drafts have to be bad. I think BDD has to smash Faker. And I think Doran has to play bad, like he had been criticized of doing so in previous World Championships up until this year. And that would be how KT steamrolls and wins a surprise 3-0. So those are all the predictions. I want to move back from the series a little bit and talk again about the legacies. This was a conversation that I was really excited to have with Chronicler, but he couldn't make it because of internet, but I still want to do it quickly here. Just comparing the two different T1 dynasties and figuring out which one was better. So T1's in their 4th consecutive world final. But the weirdest thing about this is they have 0 MSI wins and only 1 domestic final. The previous T1, the 2015 to 2017, had 4 LCK titles, 2 MSI championships, 3 MSI finals, and then 2 of 3 worlds. So this team has made more worlds. I think if they win the 3rd world championship, it's going to overpower it. But it's really interesting because they haven't won nearly as much domestically. But this is where I want to bring in Chronicler's point, which I think is a really good take. He would still say that this iteration of T1 is greater. Even though they didn't win the LCK that much, just the one time, they've just been consistently so good. 2022, spring, they win. This is just LCK results. 2022 summer, 2nd. 2023 spring, 2nd. 2023 summer, 2nd. 2024 summer, 3rd. 2024 spring, 2nd. 2024 summer, 3rd. Road to MSI, 2nd. Maybe 1st if they had actually done a real playoff bracket and they'd actually been able to play Gen G in the finals. And then they were 4th in summer, but that was after KT beat Gen G, and then Gen G turned it back on and beat T1. So pretty much top 2 or top 3 or 1 for this entire 4-year run. Gen G is this otherworldly domestic force, which has prevented them from winning. So this is what makes it a confusing legacy discussion for me. I'm still going to say, because T1 actually has the domestic and international titles that spanned the entire year through MSI, through domestically, through Worlds, that original T1 for me is still more dominant. I'd also add in that 2015 Worlds run from T1 where they went 15-1, undefeated until finals, where they barely lost one game into 3-1ing, is still to me the most dominant Worlds run of all time. There was so much more of a feeling of inevitability about that old T1 team compared to this new T1 team, which is fun, fast, explosive, clutch, but it always feels like they're scraping by. Whereas to me, that old T1 team felt more inevitable. Now, if they 3-0 this and they win their 3rd in a row, it's going to be really hard to argue with the new age fans about the take that the old Dynasty was better. But I think it's an interesting discussion, and I wanted to get it in people's heads. Number 7, there's a legacy check for BDD here as well. This is something I talked about quickly with Emily, but BDD's had such an interesting career. So he was pretty much hyped up since he's been 15 years old on CJ Entis's training team into academy team. And like the day he turned 17, they threw him into LCK. And he was just expected to be this great player. And even though it didn't happen on CJ, like a year later, he was this great player. Going into Worlds 2017 on Longzhu, they were the number 1 team heading into Worlds. They had 4 players in the top 20 players, in the top 6 of the top 20 players at Worlds when me, Papa Smithy, and I think Deficio did the rankings back then. And then they lost in quarterfinals. He lost to Uzi at MSI 2018. So he was close and kind of choked, didn't finish the tournaments the way he'd wanted to. So like just a little glimpse of what Chovy currently is doing. And then even though BDD has always been good, he hadn't really made noise since that time. But I think he was one of, if not the best players in the LCK all summer split. I think he's been the best player at Worlds this year. And if he gets the world title, I think it's going to be an amazing capper for his career. 3 LCK MVPs, 2 LCK championships, and a world title. Won't be the greatest resume by any stretch, but it's going to be a pretty damn impressive one, especially considering his insane level of play throughout Worlds. Last point, I appreciate you sticking around. I've been shitposting a bit on Twitter, trying to trigger T1 fans, and if you missed them, I wanted to read out these stats. Basically meaningless stats, but they can definitely get you to defend T1. So, here's a bad faith argument about why T1 actually isn't going to be that good against KT. So, T1 versus the LCK at Worlds the last 4 years. What has been their path to actually win these World Finals in bracket stage? In 2022, they beat RNG and JDG, 2 LPL teams, and they lost to the LCK team, DRX, in the finals. 2023, they only beat LPL teams, LNG, JDG, and Weibo. Last year, they only beat one LCK team in the knockout stage. They beat TES, then Gen G, then BOG. And like literally we all know that Gen G just doesn't win in World semifinals, right? And then this year, they only beat AL and TES. Can they actually beat KT? Because if we count those up, they're 9-0 against LPL teams, but they're only 1-1 against LCK teams. And if we look at Swiss stage, they've only played 2 LCK teams in Swiss this entire time. They lost both those games to Gen G. And remember, this team has only won 1 domestic titles in 4 years. So, Anyway, that's a bad faith argument I was using to trigger T1 fans. Then another one, the previous T1 World Finals results. I listed out all of their series scores throughout the years, 2013 3-0, 2015 3-1, 2016 3-2, 2017 they got swept 0-3, 2022 they lost in Game 5 to DRX 2-3, 2023 they swept again, and last year they won again in Game 5. They're missing the 1-3. Maybe they complete that against KT. Anyway, that was some shitposting. The very last thing I'll talk about this podcast, since there's always a lot to talk about. I haven't touched on the notion of if T1 is killing lolesports, because I do think it's nuanced. But overall, I'm going to say absolutely not. So the accusation in this take is that because T1 is so dominant, they're making it boring, which I will agree with for the people that are really invested. And then I will also agree that if they weren't in finals, or when they aren't in finals, or when they have a bad year, viewership will absolutely be down. And then the people that said that T1 was killing lolesports would be like, aha, I told you. They were too reliant on T1. Lolesports, the fools. But I think that completely underestimates the amount of people that get drawn to the sport in the first place because of Faker. And I think this is true across all singular dominant forces in sports. Golf had a problem finding popularity when Tiger Woods left. The NBA with Michael Jordan, hockey with Wayne Gretzky. But the sport, even after the drop-off of them leaving, was still in a better place than before the players started. So I just really think that so many people get drawn to the sport because the storyline is so simple. And it's so easy to become a casual fan and stick to the game when you follow this guy, this kid, this 17-year-old mid laner called Faker, and he's still the greatest player today. That simplicity is amazing. Like, ask someone who doesn't watch baseball to name a baseball player. They'll probably be able to name Shohei Ohtani, and maybe nobody else. Same with a league player, a gaming fan, even a general sports fan. Hey, have you heard about League of Legends? Name a player. They're going to be able to name Faker. And probably nobody else. And that level of fame, I think, does so much more positivity to the sport that it is overall hugely beneficial that this has happened. And here's another example. Just imagine if HLE and KT were playing in this final. Like, one of the big things that's killing all these sports is just China's not winning. And sure, T1 is the one knocking them down. But if it wasn't T1 and it was a different LCK team, that would be so much worse. So that's a quick thing. Faker, even when he's not in finals, the sport is still better off because he drew so many people into the sport in the first place. And just the people who don't leave are going to be more than would have had in the first place if Faker didn't exist. Okay. That was actually a little longer than I thought it would be. I appreciate those of you who stuck around the entire time. Worlds is going to be in 2 days, and at the time of recording this, 13 hours. We'll see. My official prediction is T1 3-1, but my dark horse prediction is KT 3-0. Enjoy Worlds, and I'll see you on the other side.